I always had to have the next thing, because that is how my parents showed that we were worthy, right? And that we had the money and we had the resources and we deserved to be there, right? When in reality, at least for most of these schools, you're there because of your test scores and because your parents can pay the tuition.
This is Articulating,
an independent school podcast. Hey, Articulating listeners, 'twas the week before Christmas, and you still haven't done your holiday shopping yet, have you? But hold your reindeer. We've got a special bonus episode featuring Christine Platt, author of the Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less. This is a must listen for those who wish to tackle overconsumption and inspire their students to embrace a more minimalist lifestyle. Enjoy!
Chaz, my son, is working at Saks through Juice Press. I don't know if you know that business, but they're co-branding with Ralph Lauren's coffee shop called Ralph's. Okay. So he gets 40% sale and 50% off of that.
Nice.
And I did get 3 things today.
Yeah. I mean, listen.
It's a denim skirt that I don't have a denim skirt. So I do need it.
If it makes sense.
I did that, a top and a belt for $100.
Nice.
Okay, so Christine, what does she? How are you going to absolve her? Like 3 Hail Marys? Like what was that?
How she did it?
No, I mean, because I think that there are things that we, that we want, and like I'm hearing 3 things, not like 20 things, right? It seems like you were super intentional.
Yes.
You don't already have a denim skirt.
I do.
You know what I mean? You sound very excited about it. It's that need, use, love. I think there's this idea that like minimalism means scarcity. I buy stuff. I'm just very intentional about what I buy. Right. And so for me, sounds like you got a good deal. Sounds like you're very excited about it. Sounds like you needed some of those 3 items. And then you're going to wear them and you love them, right? I think it's when we are like, man, it's 40% and then 50%. And it's like, I got 100 things today for $1,000. And it's like, that's when it's more of a.
So Gina and I had both recently read your book. And we had very different reactions.
Okay.
Gina, and not to put words in your mouth, Gina felt liberated. Gina felt seen. Me, it was taking me back to places I did not want to go. Yeah. And that is not a critique of your book, because I think that's part of the journey, right? That's part of the experience.
That's part of the work. Yeah. The Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less. And I would say, like the title sort of implies, it's about learning how to live with less, how to be a more mindful consumer, how to be a more intentional consumer, I think. But as opposed to going on the journey to sort of find what sparks joy, or, going to grab your trash bags and, figuring out what you need to donate, the first part of the work is really understanding your unique psychology of ownership. So what Sam is talking about is really getting to the depth of understanding what are your motivations for buying and having and keeping certain things, and what are your attachments, right? And oftentimes it ties back to our childhood. I'm always like, so much starts in our childhood. So much starts when we're young adults, right? But honestly, in our childhood, what we were shown, what we were told, what was modeled for us, what was the standard, what was the ideal in our communities, in our homes, those things become very rooted in us. And we often make promises to ourselves as children that we are very committed to keeping as adults, right? When I grow up, I'm gonna buy whatever I want. right? Like we make those promises to ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're
You're like, I'll
really
remember those
committed.
sneakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
We've worked
I mean,
hard. We've earned that. We've earned that. You know, we deserve
but a
that.
lot of that is like what we've heard and what we were shown, right? And so it's getting to the root causes of understanding your unique psychology of ownership and why you consume and have more than you need to. And it's not a I think oftentimes people think of it as a critique, right? Like there's so much I learned writing this book and going on my own minimalist journey, because for some reason, and again, I don't know how or where this came from, right? But it's like it's a competition. It's how many things do you have? It's right, but it's such a personal journey. Sam, I'm not surprised that you had that experience. I mean, I think anytime we have to look back on those parts of ourselves, right, to understand like what our beliefs are, what our behaviors are, where they came from. Yeah, it's a kind of tough reckoning to do that inner work. And I tell folks all the time, I mean, that's where got to get to the root of it, right? Because that's where the answers are.
Yeah.
What's typically the feedback you're getting? What are people coming up to you and saying?
Oh man, I mean, people love it, right? I mean, I think, even when I get that, man, it was so hard, it awakened X, Y, and Z in me, right? Like people are grateful for the work because I found so many people who have decluttered their homes before, who have tried minimalism, have tried all these different things. They're like, and the stuff keeps coming back, right? And the stuff keeps coming back because you don't understand your psychology of ownership. And so that's mostly the feedback that I get, which is just like, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for helping
Liberation.
me understand, how that psychology of ownership works, how our cultural and familial ties play into that, because it's not just Black and brown folks, right? I mean, I hear from folks across every nationality, every religion, every demographic, right, has their own sort of cultural assumptions and history that has framed the way that they consume and the way they look at things and the way they may hoard things or the way they are attached to certain things, right? And so I hear from professional organizers all the time who say, I share this book with my client. And any community that comes from a marginalized history, background, oppressive experience, it's all the same.
Wow.
Yeah, I hear from so many people. So yeah, it's been really powerful.
I came across you through your fictional writing. So let's just put it out there. Christine not only wrote the Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less, she also does a series of children's book. Come on, Miss Frankie, that speaks to social justice issues. And then you did this piece called piece of fiction with Catherine Williamson Green called Rebecca Not Becky. And and it's all about the relationship between a white woman, a white mom, and a Black mom coming from two different spaces, but finding that they do have a lot in common. And one of the things that they have in common is that both of their children attend private independent schools. And Miss DeAndrea, right?
Yes.
I thought about her again as I read the Afrominimalist because she's the antithesis of that, right? She has all of the things. She has the big house, the handsome husband, everything. I think Range Rover, or was it? Maybe that was Becky that was driving. Yes, I mean, doing all of that. So I'm just curious what that experience was like because you wrote that book after Afrominimalist.
It's interesting. DeAndrea is representative of myself and so many other Black women who I know, so many first-gen Black folks, right, who are able to provide opportunities for their children in ways that can be very challenging and conflicting to, our other ideals at times, right? And I think it's a very kind of tricky road to navigate. And with DeAndrea's character, you see a lot of my personal experience. You see a lot of the experiences that I share with other moms. I mean, my daughter's in college now, but at the time, you know, our kids were in independent schools. They were in these private schools. They were in, you know, the upper crust parochial schools, right? And just the conversations and experiences that we would have to navigate, it would be so challenging, right? But on the other hand, you know, there was this idea that we wanted to provide our children a different level of exposure to more of the reality of what this country represents. And I think you see that reflected a lot in DeAndrea's character, that very conflictedness that I think happens within Black families that have children at these predominantly white institutions. And that can be all the way from K through 12, all the way to college, right? Because you are navigating some very rough waters, right? Even the schools with the best intentions, the best missions, the best hearts, the best teachers, right? Like there's no way to avoid and understand that this country is built on a white supremacy structure, that it is systemic, that it is unavoidable. And so I think, you know, when those moments happen, there's always this like, I know it. You know what I mean? Always wondering if you had made the best decision for your child, even if they're thriving, even if the academics are off the scale, right? Like you're wondering socially, did I make the best decision, right? If socially they're thriving, you're like, what did I do academic? It's just this constant turmoil.
I just want to say this, and then I'm not looking for a response. I just want to say that one thing I'm not conflicted with independent schools is the resources that I'm surrounded by. I love all of that. I love the finer things. I love the cocktail parties. I like that stuff.
What are those material items that you remember that either you felt you needed to have them or your child, your student felt they needed to have them at that independent school that kind of represented that, you know, the haves, have nots, the white supremacy, the like, what was that material item where you look back? Yeah.
Yeah. The independent school that she was at, I mean, that's never going to be a motivation for me. So we would have never ended up at a school like that anyway. Right. So we didn't have that whole, right. I think in the independent, at least in the area in which we live, I mean, you don't need to do all that because the tuition itself speaks for what your standard of living is.
It should.
Yeah.
Wait, what school was that? And we don't have to include it, but what school?
I mean, we love Key School. She was at the Key School in Annapolis. It was wonderful. I love Key School. They know I love them. It is not to take away anything from that. And
shout
I
out
think
to Key School.
That's what's so important for us to remember with independent schools, right? Is like they can have the mission, they can have the best resources, they can have all the things. They can't always control the families who come into the schools.
That part.
That's the part that we have to remember, right? And we were fortunate in that we didn't have, you know, negative experiences in that way, right? So there wasn't a lot of materialism and flaunting. I will say that. Yeah, there would be moments though. I remember one time Nala was invited to a birthday party. Shout out to Max. And his family was great. And I remember we got this invitation and the house number was like 1. I was like, what? Right? And like, you know, you Google it on the map and it's like the ocean and then there's the pin drop. And I was like, wow. Right. And so, you know, I take her to the birthday party, and she's the only Black child there, and they're swimming in the pool and they're having a blast. And, I think it's those moments you look out as parents. And me and Joe were just like, this is wild. This is not her reality. You know what I mean? And so I think, again, that's when I'm like, even the schools, I cannot think of a better school. It's a wonderful experience that we had, but they could not control my experiences and how I would feel when I was placed in a certain situation, right? I'm projecting because I grew up poor and I never knew anyone who lived at house number one. And I'm fearful, what is this going to do to my daughter? Right. And so in Rebecca Not Becky, that is one of the things that we talk about. We do it through that sleepover experience.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And this idea that oftentimes as parents, and this is Black and white, Black, white, brown, right? Like, you have to understand that oftentimes we're projecting from our own childhood experiences, our own childhood trauma, our own childhood fears, right?
And I think it's really good having all three of our perspectives, right? Because I do think that despite all of the things that you may have projected onto your student, I do think from the student standpoint that all of those little things did quite possibly amount to gaining social capital, getting the invitations. And I think it's a balance, right? Sometimes we overdid it. My mom, for example, would not allow me to wear anything used. Like, it had to be a brand new dress for every bar mitzvah because she didn't want the perception. And I don't think all of that was necessary. And so I do think there is some balance. And I do think, kids are very, very perceptive.
And I think it's so interesting because, and I love that you mentioned like what your mother did, right? Because I think this is where Afrominimalism does tie in, right? Because so oftentimes we are acting in a way in which what we were taught and shown, right? So if your mother did that with you, it is because she grew up of a generation where it was very clear you needed to look a certain way in front of these white folks. That was that generation, right? And so that becomes the standard and the norm, right? And that was her reality. And that had to be her reality because that was her parents' reality, because that reality was rooted in their survival. You did have to look a certain way and act a certain way, right? And so, and that's why I say it's so important to sort of get to the root and think about, again, am I projecting or is this a reality, right? It does become this cycle. I always have to look the part. Right? I always have to do X, Y, and Z. I always have to. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as we get older. And then we have all the stuff in our closet. Right?
Because that's what it
boils down to. It's shit.
That's what happens. Yeah, that's what happens. Right? And it's like, I grew up, I always had to have the new thing. I always had to have the shiniest thing. I always had to have the next thing, because that is how my parents showed that we were worthy, right? And that we had the money and we had the resources and we deserved to be there, right? When in reality, at least for most of these schools, you're there because of your test scores and because your parents can pay the tuition, right?
And I've met some amazing families, lovely families who are of wealth, but between having all of the things, I'm wondering how much time is actually spent together with family, right? Because you have, more money, more problems, more issues, more challenges. And I would always impress upon my children that, family, that unit is the most important thing. And that doesn't require having all of the things. They're nice and flashy, but they can be a distraction.
I think, for us, we wanted an independent school for our daughter that would allow her to truly be the the free-spirited creative
Mm-hmm.
that she is. And I remember when we were going on a tour of the Key School, and we were walking towards the barn, which is the middle school, and Nala just stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, child, and just did a cartwheel, and no one blinked an eye. And I was like, okay, she's home.
This is, and it's a good timing because right now, folks are looking at independent schools. We're smack dab in the middle of the admissions process. And I think that is another lens that people have to be able to see past, right? Again, this is a great school, but like, does this fit my ideals? You know,
does it fit your ideals? Talk to some of the other, and I mean, I think you can feel it, right? Like
yes.
You know, you walk onto certain campuses and you're like, ooh,
yeah,
it's gonna be a lot. Right?
Especially like, these New York City schools too. New York City schools.
Y'all are navigating, right? It's very important to make sure that the school matches your core values, your key values, the culture in which you want to instill in your home, right? And that you're not going to have to do a whole lot of shifting and changing and bending and morphing
to
fit into this community, or to have your child fit into this community. And I think that's what made my daughter. She had a wonderful experience. And like I said, she's a junior in college. She still comes home. When they come home, all the kids get together, and it's lovely, right? But it was a perfect fit for her. And I think with independent schools, that's really how you have to think about it. Is this a perfect or the best fit? There's no perfect fit. Is this the best fit for my child?
Christine, so in thinking about that, when we were constructing, you know, how this conversation would go, I think a lot of it had to do with centering whiteness, centering, you know, wealth in the conversation. So I think I know I made the assumption that there's a part of Afrominimalism, which is combating, you know, people trying to get or achieve whiteness. And in hearing you talk, I'm actually realizing that Afrominimalism is not actually about that, and it does not center whiteness. It does not. It's more so.
Let me just very quickly clarify about Afrominimalism, right? It is a minimalist lifestyle influenced by the African diaspora. That is if you want to be an Afro-minimalist, right? The book itself challenges mainstream minimalism, right? And people of all races and demographics have challenged mainstream minimalism, because most of the minimalists I know don't live in these all white, barren structures, right? And so what happens throughout the book is sort of this dismantling of what minimalism actually is, right? And so the book itself is for everyone, and people of all races and demographics read it. And I love that. But I also love that the publisher allowed me to speak directly to the Black lived experience on certain pages. So for example, if I am talking about conspicuous consumption, right? Conspicuous consumption is an issue for everybody, right? But then there are also these unique challenges for Black folks when it comes to conspicuous consumption, right? And giving the statistics of how we value celebrity and influencer opinions, right? Giving the statistics of understanding our conspicuous consumption looks different because of our history with conspicuous consumption, and consumption being a way for us to sort of show and prove, or try rather to show and prove who we are, right? I mean, look, I went by the moniker, the Afro-minimalist. I still do. I tried to be a minimalist. I tried the whole all white bland color palette. It didn't work for me. I was like, I'm gonna have to be the Afro-minimalist, right? But like, in reality, if I could do it all again, I would be the Afro-intentionalist, which is even a longer name, right? But you know, the book really is teaching people how to be more mindful, intentional consumers, but also giving just specific advice on certain topics for Black and brown folks that are going to be a little more challenging for us just because of our cultural and familial histories.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of conversations should we be having with our children? What should we
It's so
notice?
funny, man. It's so funny because I'm like, you know, and listen, I was the same way, so I'm not coming down on y'all parents, but like we act like these kids have jobs and that they're bringing in this stuff themselves, right? Like we are buying the things, we are feeding into the things, right? And so we are in control, right? And oftentimes this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Sam. So much of it starts in our childhood, right? Mm-hmm. This is me fulfilling an unfulfilled childhood want to have the sneakers to wear the first day of school that I didn't get to have. I want my kid to wear the sneakers, right? And so I think it's a very delicate line to say, what conversation should we be having with our children? Like, it's not a conversation for me unless they bring it to me, right? If they come to me and they're saying, if my daughter came to me and, I mean, so-and-so has $300 sneakers on, I want $300 sneakers, then it's a conversation, right? And it's like, okay, let's talk about, why do you need $300 sneakers, right? Well, so-and-so has it, but like, I mean, you want everything so-and-so has, you know, like however you approach those kinds of things. I mean, it's like you sit your 4-year-old down, you're like, I'm about to give you the history of race and racism in America, right? And literally all they asked you was, why is my skin brown, right? We tend to put so much on these conversations. We tend to project and force some of these conversations. They may not even be thinking about what so-and-so has until here you are sitting them down, bringing it to their attention, right? And they're like, actually, right? And so I think that's why it's so important to be at a school and to pick a school that really reflects your values. What are your core values, right? Let me make this really clear. There is nothing wrong with liking nice things. There is nothing wrong with wanting your children to have nice things, right? There is nothing wrong with having worked your way to success where this is not an encumbrance, an issue for you. There's no shame in that, right? I think the challenge becomes when you are trying to assimilate or feed into that conspicuous consumption by you dressing a certain way, having your child dress a certain way, when that is really not the level and status of where you're at. The challenge is, at least for so many Black and brown folks, most of us are first gen, second gen at best, being able to even have the luxury and privilege of making some of these decisions. So we have to be easy on ourselves. We have to be, we're the first generation to have the language. We're the first generation to have the resources. We're the first generation to have the access. I mean, like, it is bananas to me when I think about not just myself, but how many Black and brown folks who I know who are literally first gen everything. You're the first to go to therapy. You're the first to, I mean, like, it's crazy.
College, independent schools, right?
Yeah, and I think for so long we sort of associated first gen with like being a first gen college grad, right? But it's like, no, like we are first gen really breaking and dismantling a lot of cultural, familial, and generational trauma and decisions, right? Because we are the first generation to have the luxury and opportunity to do that. And when you are first gen, that means you don't have a model. That means you are learning as you go. That means you are going to sit there and feel uncomfortable when you're like, man, whew, I don't really know how to talk about these $300 sneakers. I know he should be investing these $300, but no one had that conversation with me. How do I, it's this constant sort of grappling with your privilege. But if I can say anything to your listeners who are finding themselves in that position, it is, you got to give yourselves grace, right? You got to give yourselves grace. You got to laugh at yourselves. You got to talk to other parents. You got to say, like, I don't really know what I'm doing here.
Whatever approach I have, whether I'm a minimalist or I'm, seeking all the material items, I just don't want to feel bad. I get concerned when, you're racking up debt or you're shaming your child or you're feeling guilt. There's just so much trauma that we overlay with the lifestyles that we choose. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do we, to me, that's the greatest affliction that we're dealt as a people. And I just want to figure out how to, like, shake that.
And I think, it all starts with being honest, right? It starts with conversations like this. It starts with us having very real conversations, right? So I would also say, don't necessarily rule out having a conversation or listening to conversations with folks who don't look like you in the independent school space, because some of them are facing very much the same challenges.
I agree with you. The assumption is that every white person at an independent school is independently wealthy, and that's not the case. It's not the case. And they also struggle with that socioeconomic imbalance. I also want to add that many of our brothers and sisters, who are, very much a part of every organization, right? Are many of them, when we talk about, keeping up with the Joneses, it's not even just our white counterparts, it's our Black counterparts at these schools as well, who, that material, the aspirations to have material wealth is palpable. It's very much seen, and what are you wearing? What are you driving? What neighborhood do you live in? What organizations are you part of? I think that if we continue to have conversations with our children that matter. Well, I was trying to figure out, and I want to close with this too, how not to see my investment in independent school education. And, I wish it was just $25,000 here in New York City. But how this is seen as a way of building legacy wealth, as opposed to just being something that is very conspicuous spending, right? Like I really place a value on the dollars that I spend, because it is opening, as you said with Nala, opening up our children's, worldview.
If that is what you believe, then it's not conspicuous consumption, right? The conspicuousness is really rooted in what are other people thinking, right? So it's like, if you send your child to an independent school because everybody in the neighborhood sends their child to independent schools, then you know what I mean? It's like, that's what you have to really and truly think about. So that's not necessarily conspicuous. I can tell that is what you value and you love, and that is being intentional with how you spend your dollars.
Christine, the holidays are coming up.
Oh,
how do we what do we as families need to keep in mind this holiday season?
First of all, the gift giving, I think one of the most beautiful ways that you can gift while being intentional and also sustainable is what I like to call disappearing gifts, right? Can the gift disappear? Example of a disappearing gift could be a bar of soap. It could be incense. If they don't disappear, gifts that that they're going to need, use, and love. But I think we have to be very mindful of that. Not gifts that you love, gifts that they need, use, and love. And then with our young people, I think there's so many beautiful ways to be creative, and they love giving. They are still at this age and at this space where their empathy is at an all-time high. And I think holidays is a time for us to really nurture that, continue to nurture that, and support their just innate love for being empathetic, especially for other children, right? And that could be, if you live in a cold state, it's a winter coat drive, right? Maybe you start collecting backpacks for back to school, right? If you, one of the best birthday parties that my daughter, the only birthday party she remembers is her 8th birthday party. And I was just on this minimalist journey and looking around the house. She had everything she could possibly need. And, you ask the kids, what do you want for your birthday? And they're like, I don't know. They really don't know, because they really have everything that they could possibly need and want. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask all these kids to bring a canned good. And we're going to have a big carnival in the backyard, and a canned good grants you entry. The night before this party, I'm getting text messages from parents, and they are like, what's going on with this party again? Girl, the kids were raiding the pantries. I mean, like, it was crazy. And kids bought bags and bags and bags of groceries. Bags of groceries. And they had a blast in the backyard. And we had this carnival, and we took all the food. I had all the kids sign a card to thank the people at the Interfaith Bowie Food Pantry. And we took the card and the groceries. It took shopping carts for us to bring it in. Nala got to meet the volunteers who worked there. And it was the most, I just remember sobbing. And I just have this picture of my daughter standing with the groceries, and she was just so proud. And like, I think we have to understand, just by the very nature that a lot of these children can attend independent schools, they are already privileged than most children their age and within their community, right? And finding ways to allow them to give and be empathetic. They still had a blast. Her birthday, she did not need a single gift. Yeah. They had sack races in the backyard, and we had a cotton candy machine. It was crazy. It was the best birthday party. But what she remembers most is how it felt to give. And I think the fact that all I asked for on that invitation was one canned good. One canned good. And the kids, they were like, what are they going to do with this one canned good? We're about to raise.
You're coming with 5 to 10 cans. Yeah. Right? So, wow.
There's so many beautiful creative ways that I think independent schools and classrooms and parents can give back during this season, that I think really lay the foundation of making sure your children remain empathetic, that they understand how blessed and fortunate they are. And that the real gift is being able to give back. And so, those are my disappearing gifts.
My wheels are already turning. My wheels are already turning for this Christmas season that's coming up, and what we can.
Fun things you can do.
Thank you, Christine Platt, for all of the gifts that you provide us with, and just, opportunities to just be intentional, to really think about what matters. And I think for me, my biggest conversation that I will have with my children, who are young adults now, and I'm hoping that the listeners will have, is that we have more than we need. We have more than we need, and we need to be mindful and thoughtful and giving, particularly to those who are not as fortunate as we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So happy holidays, everyone.
Yes.
If you enjoyed listening to this discussion, please pass it on to a friend. And don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us on Instagram at our parent organization at 4Rise. That's the number 4, RIISE. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Can we talk about knee pain, joint pain? This has got to be my favorite Vibrant Health product, Joint Vibrance. If you're an athlete, if you are into working out, taking care of yourself, if you're just going through the aging process, when a joint is aching you. So Joint Vibrance is your go-to product. You just put some in a shaker bottle, shake it up with your favorite liquid, and drink. It's also great for the skin because of the collagen. I just love it.